So with that, I would like to introduce you to Jeb Bates. He is spotlighted right now. So you should, if you're in speaker view, see Jeb's very happy and joyful face, and we've known Jeb for quite some time, but you should be seeing him and the slides. So Jeb is an executive coach, and he's a leadership development consultant based out of the Boston area, actually. And Jeb has been part of our Leadership Green Room faculty for 3 years now. And he was actually just in Louisville back in February, which, Jeb, I don't know about you, but it feels like
It was forever ago, yeah.
right? I mean, that was a whole nother, it literally was another era.
Yeah, exactly.
Even though it was just 2 months. But Jeb's courses are always some of our highest rated, and I just can't wait for you to experience Jeb. So my friend, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Lisa. I really appreciate it, and I'm so glad to be part of the micro-learning series here. As Lisa said, I've been presenting in the green room for 3 years, since its inception, actually, and each year we come back and do this. We'll be coming back again early in the next year to present. But I want to share with you folks some things today that we think will be helpful to you in working with your people during this challenging time here. And so my invitation to you is to think about, like, what if you had a way to help your people stay focused, stay resilient, and stay engaged during all of the disruptions that we've had, as well as things start to normalize a bit more. And that's really my objective today in helping you kind of think this through as a leader. As Lisa mentioned, my name is Jeb. I'm the CEO of a leadership development executive coaching company called Thought Action. And as our focus really is in helping leaders develop self-understanding and use the brain science, the neuroscience that we know about here, in order to help people find two things. One is fulfillment and results. And many times people think that those two things don't necessarily go together, but in fact that they do. So I want to share a bit with you about that today. Our model that we use, and I want to share some of this with you because it has a lot of impact in terms of how people cope with, how people deal with what's going on right now. And what we've done is taken a lot of the brain science research that's been done over the last 10 years that shows kind of how do our brains work, how do we create results, and we've turned it into a really simple graphic to help you understand how this all works. And this is going on not only for yourselves, but for your people. And the more we can learn from this neuroscience, the more then we can come up with coping strategies that are going to work in the present day as well as in the future. One of the principles in the neuroscience is that the best way to create a result is to start with the result in mind and then work backward from there. So we're going to start on the right-hand side of this graphic with the results that you want. And that could be a professional result, some kind of result that you want to create in your work or in your life. And whatever results we want to create are going to be the products of action. So as we move left in the graphic here, we need to take actions to get results. We can think about something all day long, but if we don't do something about it, it's very unlikely that we're going to get different results. And so results are the products of actions. Now, the thing is, many people take a lot of actions and don't get the results they want. So it's likely that they're not taking the right actions. So making effective choices and looking at all of our options about the actions to take is really important. So if you look in the center here, the center gear about choices and options is really where the whole game takes place, right? Making sure that we're looking at all the options for getting the result we want, and then making effective choices among them. Now, maybe you've heard people say things like, oh, that will never work, or we tried that before, or I can't imagine myself doing that. That's just a way our brains are trying to filter out options, trying to help us, but maybe actually cutting us off a bit at the knees here. And so it's very important to be looking at all the options. And as an executive coach, that's a lot of the work that I do with my clients around the world, is helping them look at all their options, not close out the options, because those ones that you're giving up on may be the very ones this time that are going to create the results you want. So looking at all the options is key. And in fact, as you work with your people, helping them look at all the options in order to get the results that you need today, given what's going on. Then once you look at all the options, you need to make sure you make good choices about those actions to take. So choosing because it's the right action for this situation, not because it's the easiest choice or the most familiar choice or the most comfortable choice or the one that you've done before, but because it's the right one now. And if we want to get results in a changing environment, these are the kind of things you need to be thinking about. Is what are all the options here? Let's take a look at them and then make effective choices about them. Now, we also use a tool called goals to help us set milestones on our way to get results here. And so you'll notice these gears kind of in the center of this process are ones that are very familiar to you. I'm sure we're conscious of them. They're kind of visible to us, right? But this is kind of normally where we function. Now, what ends up happening is the research on neuroscience tells us there's more going on in this scenario to help us get results. And you'll notice on the bottom half of the graphic, in an area that's largely invisible to us, are things that are going on kind of in our heads in this process. Things like the perceptions that we have of things, the beliefs that we hold, the expectations that we set, the assumptions that we make, right? These are all things that are going on in the back of our mind, some visible to us, but largely invisible. It's kind of working on automatic pilot all the time, yet it's driving the habits of thinking and behavior that form the way we handle our options and choices, and therefore really influences strongly the way that we get results or not. So sometimes these things in the back of our minds help us, sometimes they don't. And so the more we can shine some light on what are those things that are in that invisible zone, then we can make much more effective conscious choices. Because if we're just operating on automatic pilot, which many people are doing right now because they don't know better, we're not probably making choices. We're just sort of operating on automatic pilot, and that's not going to get us through in a very different and changing environment. So looking at these things is really key. Now, you'll also notice that there's a large gear in the background that says identity and values. And what the research shows us is that part of who we are, like who we are, what we believe in, what we care about, is influencing this entire process in a big way. And some of that is known to us, but some of that is unknown to us. And this is why, as a leader, self-awareness is so important, because if we know who we are and what we bring to the table, we can lead much more effectively. So this entire set of gears and everything are operating all the time. And in fact, we use the model of gears very specifically because when you turn one gear, all the other ones change, right? And so this is how our system is working inside of us. And it has a lot of implications for how we're handling creating results today in this crazy environment. Now, what I want to share with you is some of the ideas about how this applies in the current circumstances. And what I'd like to offer you is I've got all of the notes from everything that we are going to talk about here today in one tidy little handout. And you can get it actually right now if you want to. If you want to pick up your phone and you can text the word "lead now," all one word, to 33777. In fact, you can even just jot that down right now, "lead now" to 33777. And all of the tips and ideas that I'm going to share with you now, you can get right away in the handout if you just go to that, send a text to that place. It'll come back to you. It'll ask your name and email. It'll give it to you in email here. I'll remind you about this again later in the conversation if you can't do it right this minute. But again, I want to furnish you with the tools to be able to use this neuroscience right now. So there's some scenarios that I want to run through here in our presentation, kind of case studies that will take a look at some of the things you're facing with your people and some ideas about what to do about it. So the first case is what we call the rock and. Then we'll talk about the freak out. A third case, which we call the whirling wind. A fourth case scenario, which we call the applesauce factor. And then finally, the last one, the roller coaster. And these are kind of metaphors for what we find ourselves in as leaders right now. So let's start with the first case scenario, the rock and of course the rock and is the rock and the hard place. And often as leaders right now, we feel torn between a lot of different things. There's the goals that we have, what our organizations need, what our people need. We're often in that middle space here and everything's going on with the rushing waters behind us, right? And so the question is, how do we handle that most effectively and help our people go through that as well? Because there's a lot of lack of clarity going on right now. Everything's uncertain. We don't know what the future's about. We can't even necessarily have answers for our people about what's going to happen with our organization or our customers or their jobs. So there's a lack of clarity and a lot of unanswerable questions, right? Sometimes they're unknown. Sometimes they're things we can't yet share with our people, but there's a lot of unanswerable questions floating around. And then there's an entire sense of unpredictability, right? There's just who knows what's going to happen, and we can't barely make plans now because everything is so uncertain. So the issue here for our employees is discomfort with ambiguity, right? And you remember from all those gears here, there's probably a lot of perceptions and beliefs and expectations and assumptions that people have about dealing with situations, right, that aren't exactly clear. Because for many people, clarity equals comfort. And in a situation where clarity can't be known, then people are really uncomfortable all the time and therefore aren't at their best. They're struggling. They stay away from their work conversations because they're so concerned about it. And so the strategy I might invite you to think about with people who are in that state of discomfort around clarity is to let them know what they can count on. There's a lot of stuff that's unknown, but focusing them on what can they count on, what can they count on from your organization, or what can they count on from your team, or what can they count on from you personally, right? Because people need to know. They don't want to be hanging from the cliff. They want to know what the bedrock is underneath them. So focusing them and reminding them about what they can count on, right? So the do's in this that I might suggest is, number one, give people clarity where you can, because clarity is a path to comfort, which then keeps people focused on their jobs, right? So give them clarity where you can, and where you can't give clarity, at least set the expectations. So it looks like we don't know anything right now. It looks like in 2 weeks, we'll be able to talk more about it. And what you can count on is that I'm going to actually stay in touch with you throughout the time, and I'll let you know what's going on within 2 weeks on this, right? Let them know what they can expect. And then make sure if you promise it, you follow through. Because what's more important in the information is that they can trust and rely on what you've told them that you would do. So don't promise things you can't, but focus on what you can promise them that they can count on. That's going to help people have the grounding necessary to deal with what's coming forward, right? And one thing I'd suggest you stayed away from is saying things to your employees like, oh, look, just deal with it. Life is gray. Come on, get over it. Whatever that may be, because it's not addressing the issue. The issue is the discomfort. This is going to make them way more uncomfortable and push them away from what they need to do. And so just as a best practice, my thought is set up some kind of routine of frequent communication with your people, either with your team or individually, whether you're seeing them in person or whether you're seeing them virtually, but have a routine every so many days or so what, and then ask them how frequently they want that communication, right? Because it's designed to give them comfort in this situation. So what level of communication do they need to make them comfortable? So that's the first practice, is help them understand what they can count on, and let them know kind of through communications what that is. The second case scenario I would call the freak out. And you've probably seen this in the past few weeks, as some people just are out of their minds. They're going crazy. Maybe you yourself have experienced that, right? And so oftentimes people are in this situation where there's a lot of uncertainty. There's a lot of change. We've got rapid change going on here, right? And people are getting very frustrated by the limitations that are facing them. So they're used to being able to get things done. They're used to doing things in a certain way. Now they're running up against roadblocks. They can't get it done quickly. The people are out, they can't do it, or maybe your organizational structure has changed. Maybe some people have been furloughed. They're having frustration about how can I get things done here? And then a natural part of actually that neuroscience is that change is hard for us, right? Change is difficult. And the neuroscience behind that is that our brains try to be very protective of us. There's a part called the amygdala, which you may be familiar with, that always is sensing for threats around us. It wants to protect us and keep us safe and alive. And any change is actually perceived as a threat. And so in this very changing environment, our brains go into defensive mode here, right? It's hard work to be able to cope with the change. Even if you like change, your system has got to accommodate it. So the issue for people actually is resolving anxiety, right? This anxiety that comes along with the change, the threat that change represents. And so my recommendation is that you focus on the mindset. It's the mindset that's the antidote to anxiety. So my thought here is that you want to emphasize for people what is still the same. Everything seems turned upside down. Things are different than the way we've done them before. But people fail to see in that situation, because of their fight and flight response that they get, is they forget what's still the same. All they can focus on is what's different or what's not happening. What you want to focus with them on is what's still the same. We're still serving our customers. We're still manufacturing our products. We're still taking care of people. We're still working on our mission as best we can. We're still doing our fundraising. We're still doing our sales activity, whatever that may be. Keep them focused on what's still the same, not on what's different. Now, that's not denying that there's differences or change going on, but it's better for people's brains if you emphasize and anchor them in what is still the same. People who have rolled out technology systems figured this out a while ago. And if you've ever been through a technology change in your organization, what ends up happening is if you come and say, oh, we've got this brand new system we're implementing, we'll be able to do all this great stuff, everything's going to be different, we want to do things the way we did them before, that kind of positioning freaks people out. Okay, it's better to say, well, we're putting in this new system. It's going to allow us to do the same things we did before. Maybe the screens will be a little bit different and the clicks will be a little bit different in terms of how we do it. And we'll orient you about where to find what you used to find in the old system. But pretty much it's doing the same things that we did before. That kind of anchoring helps people get through change. It's kind of a change management principle. So with your team, think about like what is still the same even in the face of all this uncertainty, and make sure that you keep people reminded of that as well. So the do's in the situation are, number one, frame changes or disruptions in terms of how they're similar to what people have done before as opposed to what's different. Not denying the change, but just emphasizing what is in fact still the same, okay? Realize that you as a leader may have a different perspective on change than your team. You may welcome change or feel more comfortable with it than your people do, or vice versa. You may be less comfortable and some of your people may be more comfortable. So just realize there's changes in people in terms of how they react to change here. And make sure in the process here that you are paying attention to the must-do processes or things, right? So many organizations have things like compliance that they have to work with, or critical activities needed to deliver the business or their mission, right? So make sure that those pieces are at least in place, even if things are going to be a little bit different than they were 8 weeks ago, right? So what are those mission critical things that we need to do and help people make the best of it? So the don'ts here in this situation is, number one, don't just tell like quit whining, right? Because that's not going to resolve their anxiety, right? You want to help them look at what's same. And so the best practice here really is keep them focused on what they already know how to do about handling situations. People have dealt with problems with shipments before. People have dealt with unhappy customers or clients. People have dealt with the fact that we've changed things and we don't have all the information that we always need. People, they know how to do that. They may never have put them together in the present combination, but they do know how to do these things. And so keeping them focused on what they already know is going to help them get through the changes even as things evolve. Okay. The third case scenario is what we would call the whirling wind. And I don't know about you, but I see everything sort of flying around here around me. It's very confusing about the things around us, right? So people tend to get into a state of being overwhelmed by everything. Maybe you experienced that yourself. Many people are working from home or sheltering at home, maybe with kids underfoot or other family members. It's a challenge just being able to get things done in that way. I heard of one person who was taking his business calls in the closet in the bedroom to get away from everybody, right? And we're having to deal with virtual tools, right? We're not used to doing it like this Zoom meeting here. People are not used to it. There's a quick learning curve, but a big learning curve on being able to do things virtually. Now, the issue for people is distraction. Squirrel! Right? With all of this stuff around you, keeping a focus is what's going to help you stem that challenge of the distraction. Now, in terms of focus, the idea here is to reestablish or establish routines. The more you can focus on routines and rhythms, the more I think people are going to be able to cope with all of that stuff around them, right? In some organizations, some individuals, you've already had a routine, maybe you've let that slip a little bit. If you've never taken the time to establish a routine, then this is the time to do it, both for yourself as a leader and the things you have to do, but also the members of your team, right? Help them think about what's the routine I need to go to. When you're working at home or you're in a challenging situation out in the world, the more you can know what's the routine I need to do every single day, what's the kind of thing I do in the morning, what's the kind of thing I do in the afternoon, and stick to that routine in the midst of all this distraction, that will help you maintain focus. So the do's in this situation is, number one, encourage people to stay at these routines until it becomes a rhythm for them again, right? They were in a rhythm before all of this crisis, doing things a certain way. They may have to have a little bit of adaptation to that, but let them stay with it until they get used to it and get back into the rhythm. Secondly, encourage people to make checklists. Now, if you're familiar with how airline pilots work, right, they've taken off and landed planes jillions of times. But every time before the flight takes off, the pilot and the co-pilot in the cockpit run down a checklist of making sure that they've done everything they need to do pre-liftoff, right? They do it every single time, and that makes sure that they cover all the bases and they don't miss anything no matter what's going on here. They follow checklists, and there's a reason why they do it. You can learn from the pilots and do it yourself. So my invitation to you is make your own checklist of the things that you need to do and encourage or help your people to do that the same. We've offered you a checklist of all of the items that we've talked about here that you can text to be able to get. We've done that intentionally because making these checklists are going to be really helpful. And when you do have time with your team, or you do have individual conversations with your team members here, make sure that you're not just doing informational updates, but instead talking about what are the routines that we need to either get back on track with or establish. Spend time not just on the task, but on the process of getting there, because that will help people acclimate to these new routines much better. And in terms of it, don't just leave it alone and let people flounder here. Help them establish those routines that are going to keep them focused both now as well as things open up again and how things will be different after this change, right? So helping people, rather than languaging and failing, help them, give them some structure to be able to make it through. The best practice here, lead by example. Create your own checklists and processes and then share them with your people so that they can see you doing it as well. What's your checklist for today? I invite you after the Zoom meeting to do the same for yourself. Make your cheat sheet for yourself. The fourth case scenario is what we call the applesauce factor. And one of the things you'll remember from the graphic with the gears here is there's a whole bunch of things under the surface that are going on kind of automatically in the background in our brains. Perceptions that we have, beliefs, assumptions we make, and so forth, right? And when we talk about this idea of applesauce factor, you know, in the US, it's customary that probably people think of there's certain kinds of foods that might go along with eating pork chops. In many cases in the US, it's kind of traditional to have applesauce with pork chops, right? Things that we think must go together or go together all the time, or we'd be missing if we didn't have them. So think for yourself, right? If you think about Super Bowl, right? Big deal here. What goes with Super Bowl? What are the foods that you think are the must-haves for Super Bowl? Is it nachos or bean dip or beer? Like, what goes with the Super Bowl for you? Similarly, a turkey dinner, right? What's the must-haves in a turkey dinner for you? Is it, you know, potatoes or gravy or cranberry sauce or stuffing? Like, what is really part of a good turkey dinner for you, right? These are the must-haves that you think of, right? And so as an example, you know, how often do you have turkey dinner and pizza on the table at the same time? Most of the time, probably not. In fact, you might think of pizza. That's not really part of a traditional Thanksgiving, right? Those things can never go together in our minds. So what we do as human beings in our brains is we tend to think of things that we think must always go together, or things that can never go together. And this is a basis. It does help us operate, but it does not help us in the face of change. Because what it does is it sets a rigidity in our minds that keeps us stuck. And so as an executive coach working with leaders, you know, very senior leaders here, a lot of times people get stuck. It's because of this applesauce factor. So let me give you some examples of that. So one, you know, John is the only one that can do that, and he's sick or he's been furloughed. How, you know, oh my gosh. Well, is that really true? Is that really true that John's the only one? Could two members of the team kind of put their heads together and figure out what John used to do or is not able to do right now, right? Is that possibility? Are there more possibilities than just this? If we lose more staff, we'll never be able to get the work done. Okay, well, as long as we're thinking that, we're probably never going to be able to get the work done. So let's challenge that assumption. Could we figure out different ways to do things, or could we let some things go for now that aren't as important in order to get things done? We can keep things moving. We don't have to rely on exactly the way things used to be. and the assumptions that might go along with that. This month closing has got to be perfect before we can make decisions, and we can't get some information, so we're stuck. Well, is that really true? You can't make any decisions without having all that data. Could you make some provisional decisions, right? Sort of challenging these assumptions or beliefs. Or, if this goes on much longer, we won't ever catch up. Again, a very stuck way of thinking here. And so my invitation to you is to listen for these things on the part of your staff, and then help them challenge some of these assumptions, these applesauce things of things that must always go together or can never go together, right? Because the issue here is that people are living in a story in their head about how things are supposed to be, as opposed to how they really are right now. And that old thinking and that old story doesn't help us in the circumstances here. So the strategy in this case is be their coach. Listen to them, maybe challenge their thinking a bit, help them think about other possibilities, help them walk away from that sort of strong dug-in belief on things, because there are many possibilities. There are a lot of options out there. We can make more effective choices out there, but only if we have somebody help us with this. And the problem is that in our own brains, we keep telling ourselves the same story, so we need someone outside ourselves to maybe help us think these things through, or because in our head, it sounds normal to us. It's in our own voice. So the outside person is necessary in the situation. In this case, you can serve as that coach for your employees. And so the best practices here to do is listen for their conclusions that they're making or assumptions they may be making. So it means you need to listen to your employees for how their thinking is going on a particular situation, right? And keep the focus on the future rather than the present or the past. Because if we're talking about how things happened before, or even how things have been happening up until now, we're in the story. We're in that old story in our head. We're not thinking about the future. So yes, I realize that that may have happened, 2 weeks ago when we did this. Let's focus on what we have to do now and where we need to go with this, right? To step out of that old stuck place, right? And as you're doing this coaching work with your people, my invitation to you is to start with your strongest people first. And that's a little counterintuitive, because you often think, well, I need to coach the weaker people to help them catch up. But it's actually your strongest people that are the ones that are likely to carry you through all of this. So give them the attention first. Help them step into the possibilities even more. If they're covered, great. Then move on to the people for whose role or their job is critical, could be critical points of failure, that if they don't do their job or they don't make it work, then everything's going to fall apart here. And so focus on them next, and then anybody else after that. So start with your strongest people and help them first. So again, don't abdicate involvement. Don't just walk away, hey, that's their problem and so forth, because it's going to end up tripping you up. That stuck place is going to keep people stuck and not coming up with new solutions. If you have half the staff that you had before, you've got to do things in a new way. Maybe some things can be let go of, right? You need people in that mindset, and this applesauce factor is what will defeat you. So the best practice really here is check in with your people about what they might need from you as a coach. Do they want some coaching? Do they need some help getting unstuck? That's what you want to do with your folks here. The final case scenario is what we would call the roller coaster. And I don't know about you, but over the last few weeks, it's an emotional roller coaster, ups, downs, turns, twists, all that kind of stuff. It's challenging to deal with. And for some people, what that turns into is sort of just, giving up, tuning out, disengaging, right? Some people get into resistance or pushback and out of frustration. And some people even are just getting de-energized. As this thing presses on, people start to burn out, right? And so the issue here at hand is helping people with their resiliency and their resourcefulness. Now, the way to do that is to focus on what are called core needs. And we each have a set of needs inside of us. In my experience of 15 years, it's between maybe 8 and 20 things that really are your core needs, the things that energize you, excite you, and so forth. So as an example, right, if we look at this picture here of these people working collaboratively together on something on the wall, this might represent for some people they have a need for problem solving. And so working together with people gives them some great energy about problem solving. Other people, it's about accomplishment or doing important work, right? Or any of these things, right? Or maybe other things. In this situation, these people sitting together, they might have a core need for fun or friendship or shared experiences, or this person diving here, it might be, adventure or excitement or risk taking or competition, achievement, physical challenge, or teamwork, connection, collaboration. And these are just a few of the possibilities here, but we each have a set of maybe 8 to 20 of these that really operate inside of us that are needs. If we don't have them filled, it's like having a drained gas tank. You want to think about each of these core needs that you have are like a little gas tank that powers you, right? And nobody really ever has 100% of them all full all the time, but you need to at least have some fuel in the tank in order to be able to operate. And if you have 10 that are really full and 2 that are empty, you're going to feel it. It's going to take your energy away here. So maintaining our fuel in the tanks is really key. Now, many of the ways that we've been getting our needs met, like 8 weeks ago or 10 weeks ago, are different now. We can't do those same things. So we want to be looking for what are things that fill our tanks now to help us get through, right? And so the do's in the situation is, number one, be thinking about what are the core needs that my people have, because if I can help them find some way to keep some of those tanks full, they're going to have the energy to power on through the short run, as well as help us adapt for the long run. If their tanks are not full, they're going to burn out. It's going to be difficult. There may be behavioral challenges, etc. So knowing that people have core needs is key in helping them look at it. And on a challenging day, you might ask your employees, so, okay, I know you're having a bad day. Which of your needs do you feel like isn't being met really well today, right? And then look for like what's something they could do that might put a little bit of gas back in that tank. And in fact, you don't have to fill up the entire tank all the way full. Think of it like this: your car's got really very little gas in it. You left your wallet at home. You've got a couple of dollars in your pocket. You can at least put a few dollars worth of gas in the tank to be able to get you home. You don't have to fill it all the way to the top, but at least doing something that's going to help you with that. I'll give you a great example of that, which is someone who has a strong need for completion, and we're having trouble getting things done because of all the disarray here. Their tank is getting drained. But what's something they could do that would give them a sense of completion, to put a little bit of gas back in that tank to get through to tomorrow? Unloading the dishwasher, rearranging a drawer, finishing their expense reports. What's going to give that person a sense of completion to be able to manage their energy to keep it through, right? And also too, you want to know your own core needs as a leader, right? You have needs out there. Many times when you have conflict or difficulties with your people, it's a conflict in the way that you each are trying to get your core needs met, right? So recognizing your own core needs is key to help you. Now, people are always asking me like, well, Jeb, how do I know what my core needs are? And so one of the things I want to invite you to is we also have another free webinar that we're coming out with very shortly on getting your needs met in uncertain times, right? And so if you've texted to get the handout here, it has on there information about how you can email us and ask to be invited to this free webinar that's all about core needs, understanding that more deeply, helping you understand a bit more about your own core needs and ideas about how to get those met. So I invite you to join us for this other free webinar here. Again, it's on the handout that we send you. I invite you to us to be invited to that. And in terms of don'ts here, right? Don't ignore that people have core needs, right? Because it's going to unseat you. Ignore their core needs at your peril. This is what's either going to power people to power through it, or it's going to drain them and have them come to a halt and run on empty, right? So the best practice here really is help people see how they can get their core needs met in a different way. Someone who has a core need for sort of periodic reflection, maybe you can decide, I'm the one that volunteers to drive to the pharmacy all by myself for 15 minutes and back, that's enough to put some juice back in my tank, right? If I have a need for bigger impact, what's some things that I can do even though I'm working from home that will have an impact that I can see, right? Asking yourself these questions and also helping your employees find those things will help them power through. So we've been sharing a series of strategies here to help you meet some of these needs based on the neuroscience and how people's brains work to help them make it through this situation here. And the first strategy was, help them understand what can they count on right now so that they have that bedrock foundation. Second is emphasize what's still the same. Yes, things are changing, maybe even radically, but what is still the same? Third strategy is establish or add routines, right? Get it down. Take the time to organize what those things are so that you can repeat them and therefore kind of keep yourself free of distraction and stay focused. Strategy 4 is be their coach. Listen to them and help them look for where that applesauce factor is getting in the way, right? What are assumptions they're making about things that must always go together or things that can never go together? And then the 5th strategy is focus on their core needs. Be aware that on any given day, people's core needs are being met or not met. The more you can help them get their core needs met, the more likely they are to then be able to perform for you, stay focused, get the job done, and cope with the changes as we get to the other side. So again, if you hadn't had a chance yet, if you want the list of all these best practices and ideas, you can get the checklist sent to you in email. You just text lead now to 33777. It'll ask you for your email, and then it will email you this exact handout with all of these practices on it that we've talked about here. Also, if you were interested in that other free webinar about how to get your own needs met, your core needs met, it has instructions on there about how to email us in order to be invited to that webinar, which will be coming up soon. So again, if you haven't had a chance to do this yet, make sure you get the handout for today's conversation here. And I will be coming back to Louisville in February to do one of our programs that we've done very successfully called Coaching Others for Higher Performance. And so I'll be looking forward to coming to the Leadership Louisville Center February 26, 2021, and do that. And the information for that will be posted soon on the Leadership Louisville website under Green Room. So once the dates are there, you can enroll in the class. I'll be back in Louisville to help teach you more about how to coach your people much more effectively and how to work with their core needs. So Lisa, I think it's a great time for us to maybe take some of the questions that have been coming in here. What are people saying? What would they like to know a bit more about?
Absolutely. So Jeb, what we are noticing in the chat is that the squirrel analogy and your reenactment of that around distraction and also the gas tank are really, really resonating with people. Some questions that have just come through now, and then I'll go back to some that came in a little bit earlier in the talk. Donna's asking, could you share some examples of core needs to help the staff identify really what you're talking about there?
Great. And so one of the ways to help people understand some about what their core needs are is to look at what have been really positive experiences for them. And that usually is an indicator for what the core needs are, right? So that you can start to see what the gap is. So as an example, what I will ask my clients is, so what's a peak experience? What's been a peak work experience for you? And they might describe some project or something that they were involved with and so forth. And then to ask them the question, so what need in you do you think that was fulfilling? And for some people, it might be that was about accomplishment or achievement or recognition or being part of a team or whatever. You don't know exactly what their flavor of that is. But the more you can look at their positive experiences they've had, and then that will help you discern what's the need that's probably likely not being met very well in the situation. And then brainstorming with them, okay, so what's something you could do today or tomorrow that would give you that same feeling back? And with a little bit of creativity, you can usually identify something to put at least a little bit of fuel back in that tank. So it's looking at someone's peak experiences of work is the way to kind of discern what their core needs are.
So there's a question that's also linked to that one that I'm actually going to jump to now from Angie. How do you get second level leaders on board with the need to understand the core needs and what their staff needs? Because so often they're wrapped up in their own concerns and they're not valuing what others are feeling.
Yes, absolutely. And so the way in for that is actually as you work with them, letting them realize their own core needs and what are being met or not being met. So they get that they actually exist. And so again, talking to them about like, if they're frustrated with something, oh, my team's not doing this, or I can't get any work out of them. All right, so what's the need in you that you think that's not being fulfilled right now? Or sometimes you use the word need and people are confused with that. So what is it about that bothers you, right? Or something like that, that will draw out what that is. So getting them to have the experience of it. And then realizing that usually the problem that they're having with their people is about the way they're getting their own needs met. So as an example, if someone has a need for accomplishment, they may look at it like driving people hard is going to make sure that I get my need for accomplishment met. Yet if they're working with an employee for whom freedom is a very high core need, that's going to be an instant clash, right? The person with freedom doesn't doesn't want to be told what to do. And so in that situation, the person who has the accomplishment need is pushing away from getting things accomplished because of how they're working with their individual employee, right? So getting, having them case by case examples is really key. So who's the person you're having problems with? Let's look at what the difference in the needs might be and get it out there. It's an evolving process for people, obviously, because most people figure they're using those blue gears that we talked about earlier. They're just focused on the goals, the actions, the choices, and getting the result done. And they're not looking at the other parts of the neuroscience. So that's my invitation, to sort of focus on them as case study first. And then from that, they sort of like, oh, wait a minute, I can get more out of my people this way.
Yeah, it's almost role modeling that behavior and
Exactly.
creating a coaching culture through this. And I can't think of a better learning lab, if you will, than what we're all facing right now.
Exactly.
So Rachel is asking, what are some ideas on getting the stubborn team members to value these type of soft skills and to appreciate this type of conversation? And I actually think some of the things you just said could do just that.
Yeah, and again, I think probably with that stubborn person, the reason they're stubborn is they've got some applesauce in there somewhere in their gears, right? And so, if they're so stubborn about it, there's some kind of belief that they're making, like, if I let up on them, the work will never get done, right? Or if I were to take some of these things into account, it's a waste of time, right? So it's listening to them and looking at what are those connections they're making. Or, if I spend time, there's no time out there. If I spend time on that, we won't get the stuff out the door. There's some kind of applesauce going on with that person that you can maybe challenge. If you can pinpoint what that is, you can challenge that assumption. Well, wait a minute, is that really the only way to do it? If you were to light up on people, how do you know that that's what's going to happen? Oh, well, it's been that way before. Well, that's not right now. Let's look at what we can do right now and try this out, right? So it's breaking that applesauce cycle with people, which might require a bit of a confrontation or an invitation to think about things differently, but that's where that's going to get them out of it's really a stuck place they're in their thinking. It's challenging some of those assumptions so they get what they are. They're operating on automatic pilot. Calling it out often will start the process of breaking that down.
Wonderful. So switching gears a bit, from Catherine, we are starting to plan for after. Can you speak to best practices or strategies for that planning?
Beautiful, beautiful question. There was a question that was submitted in advance too about, like, how do we cope with the new normal, right? And what I would suggest is that these principles that I've been talking about here in terms of how the human brain works are true, number one, in the crisis, but also afterwards, right? I mean, we're in this deep crisis right now here. The new normal will be different, okay? But a lot of the same undercurrents are going to be the same. I mean, before this crisis, 53% of people were unhappy in their work, right? 61% were unengaged, and 17% of those were actively unengaged, right? That stuff is still in there. And so as you're planning going forward, taking into account that these same dynamics that we've been talking about here, distraction, anxiety, ambiguity, the sort of disarray of everything, all those same principles are going to be key. And just realize that maybe there's not going to be the clarity. Often planning is about trying to predict clarity, right? Clarity may not be there. So it's about focusing on what are flexible plans that we can make. We can't forecast the future. So how can we be able to pivot most readily? Let's design flexible plans that we continue to evaluate kind of just in time, because we can't predict exactly what it's going to be like 6 months, 12 months from now. We can only sort of take it a piece at a time and make course corrections and deal with people's anxiety and frustration at that ambiguity or that lack of clarity in the process.
And often, the more detailed your plan, if you are able to do some scenario planning, it actually enables you to pivot more quickly because you put so much thought to what are we ultimately trying to achieve. And because you have those details, you're able to quickly sort of remove some and replace them with others that may not work.
Yeah, and we talked about routines and kind of checklists here. You can have a routine for how do we pivot, right? So we're going to put this out there. We're going to evaluate it every 2 weeks or whatever. What's our process for kind of pivoting on this, right? Who do we get involved? How does that work? Let's make a decision. How do we put it into place quickly to make that change? It's that adaptability and resilience that's going to be needed in the planning going forward.
I love that, a pivot checklist. So another question. So Janet is asking, How can leaders avoid projecting their own business fears down onto the rest of the team? Because we know that, everyone's having their own fears right now. So how can we as leaders avoid doing that?
Boy, that is a great question. And you're absolutely right, Janet, that people take their cues from you. And I don't know about you, I have a nice calm face here right now, but I'm just like you inside, like, OMG, what's going on here? What am I going to do? How do I pivot my business and so forth? That's going all the time. So it's really about turning to the places where you can get support from in the background to deal with these exact same issues that we've been talking about here. Ambiguity, discomfort, anxiety, the applesauce metaphors that we're doing. Who are our own trusted advisors? Friends, spouses, colleagues, bosses that we can turn to help us work it through, so that as we work with our folks, we can present that sense of, here's what you can count on. You can count on me to do X and so, because that's what's going to give them the anchoring necessary for them to go out there and do it. So find your own place to take it out on, but focus with your people. And it's not about being inauthentic, but it's about actually dealing with your own stuff and not taking it out on them.
Yeah, I love that piece on not being inauthentic. And showing a bit of vulnerability right now, people are actually hungry for, right, when it's done in the right way.
Yeah, and again, there's a difference between showing that you have some uncertainty and freaking out, right? So it's a level of just being honest enough, like, I don't know what the answer is, but here's what you can count on, right? Your calmness in that situation will drive that for them.
So now I'm going to jump up to a question that actually came through early in the presentation from Abe. When working with your employees that are at home right now, what are the methods of communication that are getting through to employees? And then there's his second piece is, should it be a combo of public/social media and internal, or just keep these messages internal?
So great question here. So again, first of all, what I hear you talking about is communication with the people that you might be responsible for in the organization. Some people have very large and very dispersed teams. Other people have smaller groups. And so I think it depends on the size of group that you're dealing with that you're responsible for, right? That you may need to do a bit more broadcast stuff, but what I would make sure that in those communications that you do, you focus on some of these anchors that we talked about. Make sure you're saying, here's what you can count on, and also make sure that they get that, here's what's still the same. So in that communication, you're emphasizing that. If you have a small group and you're used to having staff meetings, periodically, have that group staff meeting, right? And have that group get together, emphasize to them and reinforce to them what's going on, what's the same, what we need to get done, what are our routines and so forth. For a more dispersed group, you may need to broadcast, but make sure that your messaging is addressing the discomfort that they have, right? And you can't just say it once. You've got to keep saying it over and over again, maybe in different ways, because again, we forget or we don't hear it the first time. The more you can be consistent with your messaging about that, it gives people that stability that they need to then be able to focus on getting the business done itself.
Wonderful. Another question. So we continue to bring on new hires to the organization. This is from Alan. Any suggestions on how to continue to onboard these new hires? I'm guessing he's wondering about that from a virtual standpoint.
Yeah, boy, it's really tough right now, isn't it? With having to do all virtual hiring, perhaps, and then bringing people on board here. Again, I think someone coming new into a situation is trying to understand the culture of the workplace or the team that I have to fit into. In the conventional way, before we were in this situation, you could attend a team meeting or talk to your colleagues or whatever it is. People are a bit more isolated coming in from the outside here, and so the more you can help them understand, like, what is the culture of this team, the more you can connect them with colleagues so that they can have those conversations by phone or by Zoom or whatever it is, because it's really difficult to onboard people and with no context whatsoever. They need to know what you expect of them, being clear with your expectations. Let them know what they can expect of the culture of the team. This is how we operate here. That's going to onboard them to be able to be productive much more quickly. It's not just about learning the tasks of the role. It's about learning how to integrate into what we have here. And they may need a little bit of hand up to help that. And if you're onboarding quite a number of people at the same time, maybe you set up a little sort of Zoom support group for those new hires so they can talk about what's going on. Maybe you bring in some existing employees who've been there for a while to sit in that group and maybe give those answers. It's about acclimating people to your organization and their culture in order to help them be successful both now as well as when when things open up a bit more and they can do things more conventionally.
Yeah, we actually did bring on a new hire since this all started, and her very first staff meeting was Zoom, and it was virtual, and she's working at home with a very small baby. And so we traditionally, if someone joins the center, you would have, we're only 15 employees, so you would have a coffee in your first 2 weeks with absolutely everyone. What we did was we did virtual coffees, and so imagine sort of building this out to much larger organization. You can be very strategic about who they have these virtual coffees with. So for instance, maybe someone is more about the technical aspects of their job, whereas someone else is more of this person that explains the culture, yet someone else's operations, and just doing kind of doing the same things you would do, but then translating that to virtual as much as you can. And a related question has come through.
I might add one more comment on that, Lisa, which is also to remember that that person has core needs, right? That you can even ask them, so what's weird for you about coming to work in an organization right now virtually like this? And let them talk about, well, I usually like to be connected with other people and this is really hard, or whatever it is. Connection's one of those things that people have been struggling with virtual work and virtual tools and all that kind of stuff. Because you can't be in the same room with people, you can't sort of get that vibe from them. But remember, the connection is also about stories, right? So we may not be able to be physically together, but the more we talk about ourselves or tell stories, that's the basis on which we connect. So even if we're doing this over telecommunications, the more we get into stories and connections as human beings, the more people are going to feel that connectedness, even though they're working in their home alone.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, sure. The next one was any advice for bringing furloughed employees back up to speed on plans that were created while they were out? So much is happening right now, and there are many employees that are completely missing that, but we have every intention of bringing them back. How do you get them up to speed? And this is from Ashley.
Beautiful, beautiful question here. And in fact, what I would say is that's like waiting in applesauce, right? That what's going to happen is you folks will have moved on a bit with strategies, coming up with solutions or whatever it is that someone will have to reintegrate with. And the first thing in their mind is like, wait, this is how we used to do it, right? They're sort of stuck in that assumptions about what they need to do. So one thing is you might want to prepare people who are coming back from furlough saying, look, we've changed some things around here, but here's what's still the same. And you'll see that there's some reasons why we're doing some procedures differently. We've moved a bunch of things around here. Here's what's still the same, and then here's what's different and why. Because if people understand the why on this, it makes it easier for them to get out of that stuck set of assumptions that is going to keep them stuck and be resistant to these new changes that you put into place.
Another one has come through really interesting from Kenya. How do you manage performance throughout this, understanding the need for both compassion and flexibility?
Yes. So I think the key thing with that, Kenya, is it's about setting the expectations for right now, right? So what are you expecting of people and what are they agreeing to do, right? So great example is people who have small children at home, right? It's harder for them to maintain the rigid strategy that they had for doing things when they would go to the office all day and had childcare, right? So what is your expectations? Keeping the eye on the result, not necessarily on the how you get there, and making sure people know what's expected of them in terms of result. And then they may need to move things around given their family situation, given the constraints to make that happen. So the focus is not on the how to do it, but what you need to get done. That will make it easier for people to accommodate in these situations. And you're managing the performance for the results they create, not necessarily the way to do there. And they may need some help in coaching about how to swizzle things around in order to get that result. But I think that's the easier way to do it, is what do you expect and what are the results that people expected to create?
So we'll do one more question here from Caton. What are some of the best quality practices you have seen in top executives as you talk to people around the world? What type of skills or characteristics are you seeing in the leaders at the very top?
Great question here. And it's pretty consistent even before COVID-19. It's the same exact thing, which is that that really effective leaders, number one, know themselves really well. So you know what your thinking is, you know what your applesauce is, you know what your core needs are, and then you communicate your expectations really clearly to others. That's almost universal out there, right? And in this time where everything's disrupted, it's hard for people to be able to do that. So I think that's one of the key things is being able to communicate effectively with your expectations, and then know yourself so that you don't get in your own way of helping your people get through this.
You know what? And we actually will squeeze in one more here. And I know this is on everyone's mind. And I know we certainly have been talking about this at the center. But do you anticipate that the new normal will indeed be a hybrid between online and physical? And that is from Adele.
I think absolutely this is here to stay. I don't know about you, but in my business, I've been using Zoom for 6 years. I live on Cape Cod. I have a mix of either I'm working from my home or I'm traveling to places like Louisville where I'm working with customers. So I've been doing this for a long time here. What's happened in the last 4 weeks is people who've never touched this technology are now getting used to doing it. And so people are going to be saying, well, do we really need to fly there and do this? Or do we really have to meet in person for that? You start to question some of these things that could be better productivity perhaps. So I don't think things are going to go back to the way they were before, because it's like the horses out of the barn here on this. People also will realize that they need more connection. So maybe there are some places for in-person communication, et cetera. But I think it's here to stay. And I also think that, you know, staffing levels will be different and you have to come up with creative new ways to do things. That's going to be the necessity going forward, is that flexibility, that pivoting, and just not expecting things to go back to the way they were before. That's that applesauce that gets in our heads.
Well, applesauce is certainly going to stick in my head, Jeb, because now you've given us some great language to help navigate what we've all been facing. We're seeing lots of thank yous coming through for you, and I just want to give you a personal thanks, Jeb. I have received the benefit of Jeb's coaching personally, and I can tell you it is truly unique. If you're someone who's had lots of coaching in the past, it's just very different with Jeb. So thank you, Jeb. To everyone out there, I will be following up with an email where you can see a recording or link to a recording of this session and a bit of a summary. Please do text the 33777 to get that checklist from Jeb. That's another standout for me, having your pivot checklist, but also your leadership checklist along the way. May you and your loved ones, Jeb, and everyone that has joined us today stay safe and healthy in the weeks and the months ahead. And just thank you all for being here, and have a wonderful day.
Bye, everybody.